My Apache neighbor kissed me during an argument, and she said, "That kiss was just for you." It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors by name and exchanged polite greetings whenever they crossed paths. He had always appreciated the calmness of his surroundings. It gave him a sense of comfort, a feeling that life was simple and predictable. But despite the serenity of the neighborhood, there was one person who always seemed to challenge that peace: his neighbor, a woman from the Apache community who lived just next door. She had always stood out in the neighborhood. There was a certain fire in her eyes, a boldness in her manner that made it impossible to ignore her. She was confident, outspoken, and never afraid to speak her mind, even when it made others uncomfortable. To him, she seemed both fascinating and frustrating at the same time. He had admired her from afar, noticing the way she moved through life with determination and strength. But he had also experienced her sharp tongue and quick temper, which could turn any small disagreement into a heated exchange. Their interactions had always been a mix of polite nods, brief conversations, and occasional disagreements. He remembered the first time they had argued and how it had left a mark on his memory. It had been over something trivial, a shared boundary between their gardens. She had planted flowers that slightly crossed into his yard, and he had asked her to adjust them. She had laughed, dismissing his concern, and that simple disagreement had escalated into a spirited debate. Neither of them had backed down, each defending their point of view with equal passion. Yet, despite the tension, there had been a strange connection between them, an unspoken understanding that they were both equally stubborn and unwilling to compromise easily. On that particular afternoon, the air was warm, and the sun shone brightly over the neighborhood. He had been tending to his garden, trimming the bushes and watering the flowers, when he noticed her approaching. She walked with purpose, her steps confident, her expression determined. He had a feeling that another argument was about to unfold, though he couldn't explain why he felt both nervous and curious at the same time. "Hey," she called out, her voice carrying across the small yard that separated their houses. "Your dog keeps digging in my garden. I've had enough of it." He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I told you before I'll keep him under control, but he's just a dog. He doesn't understand boundaries like we do." She shook her head, frustration clear in her eyes. "That's not an excuse. You need to do something about it, or I'll have to take action myself." Her words were firm, almost challenging, and he felt a surge of irritation. He had always considered himself a responsible neighbor, doing his best to maintain peace, but there was something in her tone that made him want to stand his ground. "I am doing something about it," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "But you can't expect perfection. Accidents happen." The argument began innocently, but as they continued to speak, the tension between them grew. It was the kind of argument where neither person wanted to admit they were wrong, and each felt justified in their stance. He noticed the way her eyes flashed when she spoke, the slight flare of her nostrils, and the determined set of her jaw. There was something mesmerizing about her, even in the middle of a confrontation. "I don't want excuses," she said firmly, stepping closer to the boundary line. "I want results. You need to keep your dog under control, or it will keep ruining my garden." "I said I am keeping him under control," he responded, raising his voice slightly, though not aggressively. "It's not my fault he's curious. Dogs are curious by nature." They stared at each other, each unwilling to back down, each equally frustrated yet strangely aware of the other's intensity. He felt a mixture of irritation and admiration. She was strong, passionate, and unafraid to confront him directly. Most people would have avoided a disagreement like this, but she faced it head-on with no hesitation. For a moment, the argument paused. They both took a breath, sensing the weight of the moment. The sunlight reflected off her hair, giving her an almost radiant glow, and he realized that the small spark of tension between them felt different this time. It wasn't just about the dog or the garden. There was something more, something unspoken that lingered in the air between them. "You know," she said, her voice softer now, "you could handle this better if you actually listened. Maybe then we wouldn't have these problems." He blinked, surprised by the change in tone. "Listen, I am listening, I just think you're overreacting a little." She let out a small laugh, a sound that caught him off guard. It was genuine and light, unlike the sharp tone she had used moments before. "Overreacting, maybe, but only because I care about my garden. And maybe because I don't like being ignored." Her words struck him in an unexpected way. He felt a strange warmth spreading through him, an unusual mix of embarrassment and curiosity. He had never thought of her this way, not in such a personal sense. She wasn't just a fiery neighbor anymore. She was someone who made him feel things he didn't fully understand. The conversation continued, moving from the dog and the garden to other small matters, things that neighbors often argued about but rarely found resolution for. Yet this time, it felt different. There was an undercurrent of something more, an energy between them that was impossible to ignore. He found himself listening more intently, noticing the nuances in her expressions, the way her eyes held both challenge and something softer beneath the surface. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across their yards, the argument reached a strange turning point. They had gone back and forth, each defending their position, and yet neither felt the need to leave. Instead, they stood there, close but not touching, aware of the tension that hung in the air. He realized with a mixture of surprise and curiosity that this argument was unlike any other he had experienced. It was intense, yes, but also strangely intimate. There was a connection he couldn't explain, a feeling that went beyond simple disagreement. She was more than a neighbor. She was someone who could challenge him, provoke him, and yet make him feel alive in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time, he noticed the little details, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the determination in her stance, the subtle warmth in her voice. She was bold, fearless, and unapologetically herself. And somehow, in the midst of the argument, he felt a growing awareness that she saw him differently too. The argument didn't end that day. They both went inside eventually, the tension lingering like a faint hum in the quiet neighborhood. But he couldn't stop thinking about her, about the spark that had ignited during their confrontation. He wondered if she felt it too, if she noticed the way their words had carried an unusual intensity. That evening, as he sat alone in his living room, he reflected on the events of the afternoon. He realized that the argument had revealed something unexpected, a side of her he hadn't seen before, and perhaps a side of himself he hadn't acknowledged. She was bold, fiery, and direct, but there was also a depth to her that made him pause and think. He couldn't quite put it into words, but he knew that things between them were about to change in ways neither of them could predict. In the quiet of his home, he smiled to himself, recalling her laughter, her sharp words, and the intensity of their exchange. The neighborhood was still calm, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze, but inside him, a storm of emotions had begun. He didn't yet understand what it all meant, but he knew one thing for certain. His neighbor was someone who would leave a lasting impact on his life, and their story was far from over. As night fell, he found himself looking out the window, catching a glimpse of her silhouette through her own window. She was there, perhaps thinking of him as he was thinking of her. The quiet neighborhood held its usual serenity, but for him, everything had shifted. The argument had ended, but the connection had begun. And deep down, he felt a mixture of anticipation and curiosity, wondering what the next encounter would bring, and whether the fire between them would ignite into something he had never imagined. The next morning, the neighborhood seemed calmer than ever. Birds chirped in the trees, the sun reflected off the rooftops, and children played quietly down the street. Yet for him, there was an undercurrent of restlessness. He kept replaying the previous day's argument in his mind, trying to understand what had happened. The words they had exchanged, the intensity of her gaze, the way she had stood her ground, all of it lingered in his thoughts. There was something about her that both frustrated him and drew him in, a combination that left him feeling strangely awake and aware. He stepped outside to check on his garden. The dog was happily digging again near the fence, oblivious to the ongoing tension. He sighed and called the dog back, feeling the familiar pull of responsibility and irritation. As he straightened the plants near the boundary, he noticed her walking down her path, heading toward the front of her house. She wore a determined look on her face, her hair tied back neatly, and her steps carried a confidence that made his chest tighten for reasons he didn't fully understand. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but firm. Her eyes held a spark, the same intensity from yesterday, but now there was also something different, something softer, almost teasing. "Morning," he replied, trying to sound casual, though he felt the awkward tension in the air. He wondered if she had slept on the argument, whether she was still angry or if something had changed. She stopped at the edge of the fence and looked at him closely. "About yesterday, I know we argued," she said, "but I meant what I said. The dog can't keep crossing over. I need my garden to stay in order." "I understand," he answered quickly. "I'll make sure he doesn't come near your side again. I really didn't mean for it to become a big deal." Her lips curved slightly, as if suppressing a smile. "I know, and I probably went too far too. But you have to admit I was right about the digging." He chuckled, feeling the tension ease slightly. "Yes, I'll give you that one. You were right." For a moment they stood there in silence. It was a quiet kind of pause, but it carried a weight of anticipation. He noticed the way her eyes lingered on him, the faint way her brow arched, and the subtle shift in her expression that suggested she was thinking about more than just the dog or the garden. He felt a curious mix of emotions, relief, nervousness, and a strange flutter he couldn't name. Over the next few days, small interactions began to shape their routine. They exchanged greetings, talked briefly about the weather, and occasionally argued lightly over minor neighborhood matters. Each encounter seemed to carry a quiet tension, a feeling that neither of them fully understood but both sensed. Sometimes when she spoke, her words seemed sharper, her voice more intentional, and he noticed how she watched him, gauging his reactions carefully. One afternoon, the dog once again strayed near the fence. He quickly ran to pull it back, but before he could, she appeared at the boundary, her hands on her hips. Her eyes were fixed on him, and her tone carried a mixture of annoyance and challenge. "You really need to watch him," she said. "I know." "I've told you I'll take care of it," he replied, a little exasperated but also amused. Her expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to be difficult, I want things to be right. I take pride in my garden and I expect the same from my neighbors." He paused, struck by the honesty in her words. There was no malice, no anger, just a straightforward expression of her feelings. He realized that part of the tension between them came from their shared stubbornness and pride. Neither of them wanted to back down, but there was a respect underneath, a recognition of each other's character that neither had admitted openly before. "You're right," he said finally. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I promise." Her lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "Good, that's all I'm asking." It was in these quiet, everyday moments that he began to notice her more deeply. The way she laughed when something amused her, the way her hands moved when she spoke, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her, it all drew him in. He found himself paying attention to her in ways he hadn't before, noticing details that had escaped him during casual neighborly interactions. Then came the afternoon that would change everything. He was trimming the hedges near the fence when she appeared, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from her garden. Her presence startled him, not because she was close, but because of the way she looked at him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of challenge and curiosity. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone serious but not hostile. He nodded, setting down the trimmer. "Sure. "What's on your mind?" She stepped closer, just across the boundary, and placed the basket on the ground. "I feel like we argue a lot. And maybe we shouldn't." There was a pause, a hesitation in her voice that was unusual for someone so bold. "I agree," he said, his voice low. "I don't want to fight with you, sometimes I don't know how to handle your energy." Her lips lifted in a playful smirk. "My energy," she said. "You mean my fire?" He laughed softly, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Yes, your fire, it's intense. I don't always know what to do with it." For a moment they both laughed, and the tension that had been building over the past few days seemed to dissipate, replaced by something lighter, something more intimate. But the moment didn't last long. She leaned a little closer, her expression shifting from playful to serious. "You know," she said softly, "I don't just argue for the sake of arguing." Her eyes searched his face. "Sometimes I feel like I want to make sure you're paying attention." He blinked, surprised by her honesty. He wasn't sure what she meant, but there was something in her gaze that made his heart race. He felt a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The conversation continued, moving from the mundane to the personal. She spoke about her life, her family, her love for her culture and her traditions. He listened intently, fascinated by her strength and passion. He began to realize that the arguments they had weren't just about trivial matters. They were a way of connecting, a way of testing boundaries, and perhaps even a way of expressing feelings they couldn't admit outright. Then, without warning, the moment shifted. She took a step closer, closing the small gap between them. He noticed her eyes soften, the playful spark replaced by something deeper, something almost vulnerable. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I feel like I need to do more than argue with you to get your attention." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, she leaned in and kissed him. It was sudden, unexpected, yet gentle and deliberate. His mind went blank for a moment, caught between shock and the undeniable thrill of the contact. Her lips lingered for just a second, enough to make his heart race and leave him breathless. When she pulled back slightly, she looked at him with a mischievous smile. "That kiss, it was just for you," she said softly, her voice carrying a sincerity that stunned him. He could barely respond, his thoughts racing. The intensity of the argument, the tension of the past few days, and the spark that had always been there, all of it seemed to converge in that moment. He realized that what had started as a simple disagreement had turned into something far more complicated and intense. They both stood there for a moment, the air charged with unspoken emotions. Neither knew exactly what to say, but both understood that the kiss had changed everything. It had shifted their relationship from mere neighbors to something charged with possibility, a connection that neither could ignore. After a few quiet seconds, she stepped back, her expression still playful but tinged with seriousness. "I just wanted you to know that what I feel is real, even if it comes out in strange ways." He nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. I didn't expect that," he said finally, "but I think I understand." From that day on, their interactions changed. Arguments were still present, but they carried a new energy, a mixture of challenge and curiosity. Small gestures, glances, and words took on deeper meaning. They were testing boundaries, learning about each other, and discovering a connection neither had fully anticipated. He found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering about her intentions, her feelings, and the spark that had ignited during their arguments. And every time he saw her, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, knowing that their story was far from ordinary, far from predictable. That afternoon, the quiet neighborhood continued its peaceful rhythm, but for him, life had shifted. The fire in her eyes, the boldness of her personality, and the unexpected kiss had opened a door to something new, a connection that promised both challenge and thrill. And deep down, he knew that whatever happened next, he was ready to explore it, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The following days were different. Even though the neighborhood looked the same, with its quiet streets and neatly trimmed lawns, the air around him felt charged in a way he couldn't explain. Every time he walked past his neighbor's house, he felt a tug in his chest, a strange anticipation that kept him alert. The arguments and disagreements which had once frustrated him now carried a subtle thrill. It wasn't just about the dog or the fence anymore. It was about her, her presence, her energy, and the inexplicable connection that had begun to form between them. That afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the neighborhood. He was in his yard, trimming the hedges near the fence, when he noticed her approaching. She moved with her usual confidence, her steps measured but graceful. Her hair caught the sunlight in a way that made him pause, the glow surrounding her almost like a halo. She carried a small basket, filled with fruits and vegetables, but it was not the basket that caught his attention. It was the way she looked at him. There was a softness in her eyes, a spark of mischief and something more, something he couldn't yet name. "Hey," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of something urgent. "Do you have a moment?" He nodded, trying to steady himself. "Of course. What's up?" She set the basket down near the fence and crossed her arms, her expression both serious and playful at the same time. "I think we need to talk properly, about us." His heart skipped a beat. "Us," he repeated, surprised by her directness. He had sensed the tension between them growing, but hearing her say it aloud made it all feel real, undeniable. "Yes," she said, taking a step closer. "I don't mean to make things awkward, but I can't ignore the way things are between us. The arguments, the tension, there's more to it. Don't you feel it?" He swallowed hard, feeling his thoughts scatter. Of course he felt it. How could he not? Every glance, every exchange, every subtle challenge had carried a weight he hadn't fully admitted to himself. I do," he admitted finally. "I've felt it for a while, actually. I just didn't know how to deal with it." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "You're not the only one. I've felt it too, and I think maybe it's time to stop hiding it." There was a pause, a quiet moment in the warm afternoon, where the sounds of the neighborhood seemed to fade. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, but all he could focus on was her, standing just across the fence, her eyes locked on his. The tension between them had shifted from playful and challenging to something heavier, more intimate. He felt a nervous excitement, a pull that made it impossible to think clearly. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching his. "You know," she said softly, "I don't kiss people lightly. If I kissed you before, it meant something." He froze, remembering the kiss from a few days ago. His mind flashed back to the moment, the surprise, the intensity, and the words she had whispered afterward. "That kiss, it was just for you." He could still feel the warmth of her lips, the shock, the thrill, and the undeniable connection. She stepped closer, narrowing the small gap between them. "Do you remember?" she asked, her voice low and earnest. Yes," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I remember everything." Her gaze softened, and for a moment the fiery, confident persona seemed to fade, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "Good," she said, "because I want you to know I meant it. That kiss, it was not a mistake. It was real, and I want you to understand that before we go any further." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the entire world had narrowed to just the two of them. He could feel the warmth of her presence, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, and the steady beat of his own heart racing in response. Words felt inadequate. Emotions felt too big to contain. All he could do was look into her eyes and nod slowly, letting her know he understood, even if he couldn't find the perfect words. Then, before he could respond, she leaned in again, closing the remaining distance. This time, there was no hesitation. Her lips pressed against his with a gentle insistence, soft yet firm. The kiss was longer than the first, deliberate and full of meaning. He felt a rush of warmth and electricity, a surge of emotions he had tried to suppress finally breaking free. Time seemed to slow, the sounds of the neighborhood fading completely as he focused entirely on her. He responded instinctively, leaning into the kiss, letting himself feel what he had been holding back. The anger and frustration from their past arguments melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of closeness and connection. Every tension, every unspoken thought seemed to converge in this one moment. When they finally pulled back, they were both breathing a little harder, their faces inches apart. She looked at him with a mix of playfulness and sincerity, her eyes glistening slightly in the warm sunlight. "Do you feel it too?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to speak at first, the intensity of the emotions leaving him temporarily speechless. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "I feel it more than I expected." A smile spread across her face, a mixture of relief and delight. "Good," she whispered, "because I don't want to hide this anymore. I don't want to pretend it's just a game or an argument. I want this." She gestured subtly between them, her meaning clear. He felt a warmth spread through him, a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and a deep connection that he had never experienced before. He realized that their arguments, their playful challenges, and even their frustrations had all led to this moment. They had been drawn together by fire and passion, by stubbornness and honesty, and now that spark had become something undeniable. For a few minutes, they simply stood there, holding the space between them, breathing in the quiet intimacy of the moment. Neither needed to speak. Words felt unnecessary when the connection was this strong, this immediate, and this real. Finally, he broke the silence. "I never expected this," he admitted, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "But I'm glad it happened. I'm glad you kissed me." She laughed softly, a light, airy sound that made his chest feel lighter. "I'm glad too," she said. "I just didn't know how else to make you understand. Sometimes words aren't enough." The moment was broken only by the sounds of the neighborhood resuming around them, the distant laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the hum of life continuing. Yet for him, nothing would ever feel quite the same. The kiss had shifted everything. It had transformed their relationship from a playful rivalry to something far more complicated, far more intimate, and far more real. Over the next hour, they continued talking, exploring the emotions that had surfaced. She spoke about her life, her experiences, and the feelings that had led her to take this bold step. He listened carefully, captivated by her honesty and vulnerability. He shared his own thoughts, opening up in ways he hadn't expected to, revealing the respect, curiosity, and fascination he felt for her. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in a soft, golden glow, they both knew that nothing would ever be the same. The kiss had marked a turning point, a moment where fire and passion had become intimacy and understanding. They had crossed a threshold, and although the future remained uncertain, the connection they had formed was undeniable. As she gathered her basket and prepared to leave, she turned to him one last time, a playful glint in her eyes. "Remember," she said softly, "that kiss was just for you, and it always will be." He smiled, feeling a warmth that spread through his chest, a quiet joy and anticipation for whatever lay ahead. "I'll remember," he said, his voice firm, yet gentle. "And I hope we can see where this goes." She nodded, her expression softening, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, acknowledging the unspoken promise between them. Then she walked away, leaving him standing there, heart racing, mind swirling, and a smile that refused to fade. The quiet neighborhood with its trees, streets, and familiar houses felt different now, full of possibility, full of life, and full of moments yet to come. For him, the fire, the arguments, and the playful rivalry had led to something extraordinary. And as he watched her disappear around the corner, he knew that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them had fully imagined, but both were eager to explore. After the kiss, the world seemed to shift in ways he hadn't expected. The quiet streets of the neighborhood looked the same, The trees swayed in the wind as they always had, and the distant laughter of children played through the air. Yet for him, everything felt different. The simple routines, the familiar sights, and even the quiet hum of the day carried new meaning. Every glance, every sound, every subtle movement reminded him of her. The kiss lingered in his thoughts like a spark that refused to fade, igniting feelings he hadn't known how to express. He tried to focus on his daily tasks, tending to his garden, watering plants, trimming hedges, and caring for the dog, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment. The memory of her lips, the warmth of her presence, and the intensity of her gaze played over and over in his mind. He realized that the connection they had shared in that brief instant was not just a fleeting impulse. It was real, meaningful, and impossible to ignore. The next morning, he noticed the subtle changes in his own behavior. He found himself checking the fence more often, wondering if she would be outside, thinking about what she might be doing, imagining how she might react if he spoke to her. There was a nervous energy in him, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty, as though walking past her house could lead to something unpredictable. He had never felt such anticipation before in his life. When she appeared in her yard that afternoon, carrying a small watering can, he felt a jolt in his chest. Her hair was tied back neatly, her movements confident yet graceful, and her eyes met his with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. She smiled warmly, and he realized that the tension between them was no longer angry or confrontational. It was charged with unspoken understanding. "Hi," she said lightly, her voice casual but carrying a warmth that made him feel noticed in a way he hadn't before. "Hey," he replied, trying to sound relaxed, though his heart raced. "How's your garden?" "Better," she said, glancing at the neatly planted rows of flowers and vegetables. "I think I'm making progress thanks to, well, us staying on good terms." He chuckled softly, appreciating her subtle humor. "Yes, staying on good terms is important, especially now." She raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in her eyes. "Especially now," she repeated teasingly. "Yes," he said, smiling, feeling the warmth in his chest. "Especially now that, well, you know," he trailed off, unsure if he should say it aloud. She leaned slightly closer, curious, encouraging him with her gaze. "I know," she said softly. "We both know." There was a quiet moment between them, filled with subtle tension and unspoken emotions. He realized that the kiss had changed the way he saw her, and perhaps the way she saw him as well. What had once been arguments and frustration now carried a different energy, one that blended challenge, admiration, and a growing affection. Over the next few days, their interactions became a delicate dance of subtle glances, brief conversations, and small gestures. She would sometimes catch his eye across the fence, her expression playful, her lips curling in a soft smile. He found himself smiling back, feeling a mixture of nervousness and delight, knowing that each interaction carried a deeper meaning than before. He began to notice the little things about her more than ever, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the slight tilt of her head when she listened, the soft hum she made when she was focused on a task. Each detail seemed significant, each movement captivating. He realized that he had never truly seen her in this way before, and now every detail felt like a revelation. One afternoon, while he was repairing a loose fence panel near the boundary, she came outside with a tray of freshly baked bread. She walked confidently toward him, her steps deliberate and steady. He felt a sudden rush of anticipation, unsure of what to expect. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, offering the tray. "It's just simple bread, but I figured you'd appreciate it after all that work in the garden." "Thank you," he said sincerely, taking a piece. The warmth of her gesture combined with her presence made his heart beat faster. "This is thoughtful of you." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made his chest tighten. "I like thinking about you, even if it's just little things." He blinked, surprised by the honesty in her words. "You do?" he asked, feeling both nervous and flattered. "Yes," she said, leaning slightly closer as if sharing a secret. "I think about you more than I probably should, but it's not a bad thing. It's nice." Her words left him speechless for a moment. He had known there was tension between them, but hearing her admit that she thought about him brought a wave of warmth and excitement he couldn't contain. He realized that the connection they had was mutual, and that it went deeper than playful arguments or casual neighborly interactions. From that day on, their encounters became more meaningful. They would exchange small smiles across the fence, share brief conversations about daily life, and occasionally work together on small tasks, like fixing a loose garden post or trimming a hedge. Each interaction carried a subtle undercurrent of emotion, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they were forming. He noticed that he had begun to anticipate her presence, wondering when she would appear, imagining the way she might greet him, and feeling a flutter in his chest whenever she did. He realized that he was no longer indifferent to her. He cared deeply about her thoughts, her feelings, and the way she looked at him. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of pink and orange, he found himself sitting on the porch, reflecting on the past few days. The kiss, the conversations, and the small gestures all played through his mind, leaving him with a mixture of wonder and curiosity. He realized that he had developed feelings he couldn't ignore, feelings that went beyond friendship or casual attraction. At that moment, he understood that the kiss had been more than a fleeting impulse. It had been a turning point, a revelation of emotions that neither of them had fully expressed until then. The connection they shared was real, meaningful, and filled with potential. He knew that navigating this new dynamic would be challenging, but he was ready to explore it. The next morning, he was preparing his garden when she appeared again, carrying a small bag of seeds. She greeted him warmly, and they began planting together, their hands occasionally brushing, each touch sending a subtle thrill through him. The physical closeness, combined with their growing emotional connection, created a tension that was both exciting and comforting. During these moments, he noticed the way she laughed, the way she spoke, and the way she seemed completely at ease in his presence. He realized that he had never felt this level of comfort and curiosity with anyone else. Her boldness, confidence, and honesty drew him in, while her vulnerability and sincerity made him feel trusted and valued. One afternoon, as they were working side by side, she paused and looked at him intently. "You know," she said softly, "we've been through a lot in these few days, arguments, tension, and now this, but I like it. I like what's happening between us." He felt a warmth spread through him. "I like it too," he admitted, "more than I expected. And I want to see where this goes." Her eyes softened, and for a moment the playful fire that had always defined her seemed to merge with a gentle sincerity. "Good," she said, "because I don't want to hide this anymore. I don't want to pretend it's just an argument or a game. I want this." They continued working, planting seeds and tending to the garden, but the energy between them had shifted. The playful rivalry remained, but now it was intertwined with a deeper understanding, mutual respect, and a growing emotional connection. Every glance, every smile, and every small gesture carried a weight that neither could ignore. As the days passed, he reflected on how much their relationship had changed. The kiss had been a catalyst, opening the door to emotions and connections he had never anticipated. He realized that he had been drawn to her strength, her boldness, and her fiery personality, but he was equally captivated by her honesty, vulnerability, and sincerity. The combination of these qualities created a bond that felt both exciting and comforting, familiar yet new. By the end of the week, he had come to understand that the kiss was not just a fleeting moment. It was a sign of what was possible between them. It had revealed feelings, opened conversations, and deepened their connection in ways that arguments and disagreements never could. He knew that exploring this relationship would require patience, honesty, and courage, but he was ready to take that step. As he looked out over the neighborhood, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the shadows stretch across the quiet streets, he felt a sense of anticipation and hope. The kiss had changed everything, but it had also made life richer, more vibrant, and full of possibilities. And deep down, he knew that their story was only beginning, with many more moments, challenges, and joys yet to come. The days that followed were filled with a strange, beautiful balance. Life in the neighborhood continued its usual rhythm: the quiet streets, the children playing, the hum of daily life. But for him, every moment carried a subtle sense of anticipation. The memory of the kiss lingered, but it no longer felt confusing or shocking. Instead, it had become a gentle anchor, a reminder of the connection they shared and the possibilities that lay ahead. He realized that the spark between them was real, and it had grown into something meaningful, something he wanted to nurture. He found himself looking forward to every interaction with her, no matter how small. A smile across the fence, a brief conversation about the weather, or even the sound of her voice as she worked in her garden, all of it brought a warmth he had never felt before. The playful arguments that had once frustrated him now felt like an integral part of their bond, a way of challenging and teasing one another while strengthening the connection between them. One afternoon, she appeared carrying a small basket of fresh fruits and vegetables. She walked with her usual confident stride, but there was a softness in her eyes that made his chest tighten. She smiled at him, and he returned it, feeling the familiar rush of excitement mixed with comfort. "Hey," she said, her voice light but carrying an undertone of something deeper. "I thought you might like some fresh produce for lunch." "Thanks," he replied, taking the basket. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply. "I like doing things for you. It's nice." Her words made him pause. There was a simplicity in her honesty that both surprised and warmed him. I appreciate it," he said softly, "more than I can say." They spent the afternoon together, tending to their garden side by side. Their hands brushed occasionally, sending subtle sparks of electricity through him. He noticed the way she laughed when he made a small joke, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, and the quiet confidence she carried even in the simplest moments. He realized that he had fallen deeply for her, not just for her boldness or her fire, but for her sincerity, her honesty, and the warmth she radiated. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat on the edge of their yards, sharing a quiet conversation. They spoke about their lives, their dreams, and the moments that had shaped them. He learned more about her family, her upbringing, and the values that guided her life. She listened intently as he shared his own experiences, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I've never met anyone like you," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers. "You challenge me, frustrate me, and yet you make me feel alive in a way I didn't think was possible." She smiled softly, a warmth in her gaze that made his heart swell. "I feel the same," she said. "I've never met anyone who makes me think and feel like you do. You're different, and I like that. I like you." Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth that left him breathless. For a moment, he simply stared at her, letting the weight of the confession settle between them. Then with a gentle smile, he reached out and took her hand. The touch was light, tentative, but it carried a quiet promise. "I like you too," he said softly. "More than I expected, more than I realized until now." Her eyes sparkled with emotion, and she squeezed his hand gently. "Good," she whispered, "because I want us to be honest with each other. I don't want to hide anything anymore." From that moment on, their relationship deepened. They spent more time together, not just as neighbors or friends, but as two people discovering a bond that was both exciting and comforting. They shared meals, walked through the neighborhood, and spent quiet evenings talking and laughing. The playful arguments remained, but now they carried a new dimension, an understanding, a respect, and a tenderness that made each interaction meaningful. He noticed that their connection extended beyond words and gestures. There was a rhythm to their relationship, a quiet understanding that didn't require constant explanation. A glance, a touch, or a shared smile could communicate volumes. He found himself feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced before, a knowledge that she understood him in ways others never could. One afternoon, as they worked together planting new flowers in the garden, she paused and looked at him intently. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought an argument could lead to this." He laughed, shaking his head. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did. It brought us together in a way nothing else could." She smiled, a playful glint in her eyes. "I guess sometimes it takes a little fire to see the real warmth beneath." He nodded, feeling a swell of affection and admiration for her. "Yes, and I think we've found something rare, something worth holding on to." As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. They learned more about each other's lives, shared small joys and challenges, and discovered the depth of their feelings. He realized that the connection they had formed was not based on infatuation alone, but on respect, understanding, and a shared sense of honesty. Every moment together reinforced the knowledge that they were building something meaningful, something lasting. One evening, as the neighborhood settled into its quiet rhythm, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He turned to her, taking her hand gently in his. "You know," he said softly, "I never imagined that an argument, a disagreement, or even a small kiss could lead to this. But I'm grateful it did. I'm grateful for you, for us." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset and the depth of her emotions. "Me too," she said simply. "Everything that happened, it brought us here, and I don't want to let it go. I don't want to hide anything anymore." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts connected in a way words could not fully express. The quiet of the neighborhood, the soft rustle of leaves, and the fading light created a perfect backdrop for their shared moment. It was peaceful, intimate, and filled with unspoken promises. In the weeks that followed, their relationship became a blend of playful teasing, meaningful conversations, and quiet companionship. They still argued occasionally, as strong personalities often do, but each disagreement was met with respect, humor, and understanding. The fire that had once sparked conflict now fueled a bond that was exciting, passionate, and deeply caring. He noticed the subtle ways she expressed her affection, small gestures, thoughtful words, and moments of shared laughter. And he responded in kind, showing her through his actions and presence that he valued her, trusted her, and cherished the connection they shared. Every day brought a new layer of understanding, a new reason to appreciate her, and a deeper sense of emotional intimacy. One evening, as they prepared a simple meal together in the kitchen, she looked at him with a warm smile. "I never imagined that a neighbor could become so important," she said softly. "But you've become everything I didn't know I needed." He felt a rush of emotion, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "And you've become the same for me," he said. "I never expected this, but I can't imagine my life without you in it." She reached out and touched his face gently, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Then let's not imagine it," she whispered. "Let's live it, fully, honestly, and together." He nodded, feeling a sense of completeness he hadn't known before. "Yes," he said, his voice steady and filled with certainty. "Together." From that moment on, their days were filled with shared experiences, quiet joys, and the comfort of knowing they had found something rare and precious. The neighborhood remained the same on the surface, quiet and serene, but for them, life had become richer, more vibrant, and full of possibility. They continued to tend their gardens, share meals, walk through the streets, and explore the small moments that made life meaningful. But now, every glance, every word, every touch carried a deeper significance. They had crossed the threshold from casual neighbors to a bond defined by trust, respect, and a profound understanding of one another. And in that quiet neighborhood among the swaying trees, the laughter of children and the familiar rhythm of daily life, they found something extraordinary. They found each other. The kiss that had started it all, the one that had seemed unexpected and impulsive, was now a memory that symbolized the beginning of something real, lasting, and beautiful. It had been a spark that ignited a fire, a moment that transformed frustration into connection and curiosity into love. As they sat together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, and eyes reflecting the fading light, they both understood that life had brought them to this point for a reason. The arguments, the tensions, the unexpected kiss, it had all led to a bond that was genuine, deep, and full of promise. And so, in the quiet neighborhood, under the golden glow of the setting sun, they began a new chapter. One defined by honesty, care, and the unspoken knowledge that they had found something worth cherishing, something that would grow stronger with each passing day. Together they faced the world, knowing that whatever challenges came their way, they would meet them side by side, hearts connected and spirits intertwined.